Life stories. Watch what happens when a new chief confronts her officers over racial bias. They thought they had the upper hand. Two officers pulling over a lone driver, ready to show who was in charge. But what they didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel wasn't just any driver. She was their new boss, the chief of police. And this traffic stop? It was about to turn everything upside down. Cassie Owens had always been a woman of quiet strength, a person who understood what it meant to overcome the odds. After years of determination, today marked the start of her new chapter. It was her first day as the chief of police in the bustling city of Silverbrook, a city that had seen its fair share of challenges. But this was an achievement Cassie had fought for, a victory that came after breaking down walls and overcoming a justice system that often seemed more intent on keeping people like her out of positions of power. As Cassie cruised down the winding highway leading into the heart of the city, the morning sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink. She gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. Today was supposed to be a day of celebration, but there was a knot of unease growing in her stomach. Silverbrook wasn't just any city. It had a reputation. Known for its conservative values, the police department had long been under fire for its racial biases. Cassie had read the reports, heard the stories. She knew that many officers were unhappy with her appointment, a black woman at the helm of their department. But Cassie wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. As she neared an intersection, the traffic light turned yellow, then red. Suddenly, a flash of blue and red lights reflected in her rearview mirror, and a patrol car pulled up behind her with its sirens blaring. Her heart rate spiked, but instinctively, Cassie pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. She knew this wasn't an accident. The two officers stepped out of the vehicle, both white, both looking like they had a point to prove. The older officer, a man in his late 40s with broad shoulders, approached her car, his steps deliberate and slow. His partner, a younger officer, followed closely behind, his expression one of suspicion. Cassie rolled down her window, keeping her pulse steady, but every sense on high alert. The older officer leaned in, his eyes scanning her car before landing on her license and registration. His voice was flat, almost too authoritative. "License and registration," he said without any hint of warmth. Cassie reached for the documents in the glove compartment, handing them over wordlessly. She had learned long ago that silence could be a powerful tool, especially in moments like this. As she passed the papers, the older officer's gaze flickered to the registration, then to her face and back again. He didn't speak, but his expression told a different story. The younger officer, however, was more direct. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. "This area is not exactly the safest, if you know what I mean." Cassie's stomach churned, but she remained calm. "I'm on my way to work."
"And where exactly would that be?" the younger officer pressed, leaning in just a little too close for comfort. The smirk on his face suggested he already had his own assumptions about her. Cassie hesitated. She could reveal her position, end this charade, but something told her it was too early to make her move. The power dynamic was clear, and she didn't want to start her first day by clashing with the very officer she would soon be leading. "You'll find out soon enough," she replied coolly, meeting his gaze without flinching. The older officer, sensing tension rising, stepped in. "Let's not make this difficult, ma'am. We can take this further if need be." It was the subtle flex of authority, the threat disguised as professionalism. But Cassie had been here before, many times in fact. She wasn't about to let them get away with it now. She took a deep breath, the weight of years of disrespect pressing down on her. Enough was enough. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I'm Chief Cassie Owens. I suggest you rethink how you're handling this situation." The shift in the air was immediate. Both officers froze, the senior officer's face falling as the realization hit him hard. The younger officer's smirk vanished, replaced by pure shock and a hint of panic. "You're the chief?" the senior officer stammered, his voice betraying his surprise. Cassie nodded, her expression resolute. "Yes, I am. And I'd like to know exactly why I was stopped and why this line of questioning is even happening." For a moment, neither officer spoke. The younger one fumbled, searching for an excuse, but the damage had already been done. The power dynamic had shifted, and they knew it. The senior officer cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of authority. There must have been a misunderstanding. Cassie wasn't having it. "No, this isn't a misunderstanding," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "This is exactly the problem. You stop people like me without cause, make assumptions, and try to flex your authority because you think you can get away with it." The senior officer opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He knew she was right. Cassie's calmness only made their behavior seem worse. You see, it's officers like you who make people distrust the system, and it's people like me who are here to change that. Both officers stood in stunned silence, their faces drained of color. Cassie could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been unfairly targeted, questioned, or harassed simply because they didn't fit someone's narrow idea of who belonged in certain places. She opened the door and stepped out of the car, standing tall as she addressed them. "You'll be reporting to me personally for the next few weeks. I'll be reviewing every traffic stop you make, and I suggest you think long and hard about how you handle yourselves from here on out." The senior officer finally found his voice. "We didn't mean any disrespect, Chief. It won't happen again."
Cassie nodded, though she knew his words were empty. This wouldn't be the last time, not with these two, but with others. And that was why she was here, to root out the deep-seated bias that had plagued Silverbrook's police department for too long. "Good," she said quietly, before turning back to her car. As she drove away, Cassie allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had won this round, but she knew there were many more battles ahead. Her role as chief wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility. A responsibility to ensure no one else would have to endure what she just did. Later that day, Cassie gathered the department for her first meeting. The tension in the room was thick as she stood before them, her presence commanding attention. As she recounted the events of the morning, she left no detail unspoken. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," she began, her voice steady. "But I am here to make it clear that this kind of behavior stops now. Every officer in this department will be held accountable for how they treat the citizens of Silverbrook, no matter their race, gender, or background." A murmur of unease spread through the room, but Cassie didn't flinch. She had spent her whole life fighting for justice, and this wasn't the time to back down. "This is your chance to prove that you are the kind of officers who serve with integrity. But know this, I will not tolerate bias, I will not tolerate disrespect, and I will not tolerate anyone who thinks they are above the law." Her words hung in the air, echoing through the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in quiet agreement. Cassie could tell who was ready to stand with her and who wasn't, but that didn't matter. She was ready for whatever came next. Word of Cassie's encounter spread through the community quickly. For some, it was a sign that change was finally on the way. For others, it was a wake-up call. The media caught wind of the story, and Cassie soon became a symbol of what Silverbrook needed. Someone unafraid to stand up to injustice, someone determined to reform a broken system. But Cassie knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, and every decision, every encounter would be scrutinized. But she was ready. After all, she hadn't fought all these years to stay silent. The battle for justice was far from over. That evening, Cassie sat in her office, the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. Her first meeting as chief had gone exactly as expected. Some officers were on board, others less so. She knew it would take time to change the culture of a department that had been entrenched in a certain way of thinking for decades. But Cassie was prepared. She had faced adversity her whole life, and this would be no different. As she sat there, her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from her old friend and mentor, Detective Leon Harris, popped up on the screen. He had been with her through thick and thin, a constant support as she navigated her way up the ranks in a field that was notoriously resistant to change. "Heard about the stop today. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing. The department's gonna push back, but they'll come around. Just don't let up." Cassie smiled briefly, grateful for the words of encouragement. Leon knew better than anyone the challenges she faced, but she couldn't afford to let the pressure get to her. Not now. not when the work ahead was so important. Later that night, Cassie found herself staring out her office window, gazing at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She had always loved this view. It reminded her of why she was here, to make Silverbrook a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel safe and respected. A place where justice truly meant justice for all. But as much as she believed in that vision, she knew she couldn't do it alone. The department's culture would take time to change, and Cassie needed to be strategic. She needed to find the right allies, the officers who were ready to work with her, and the ones who were too entrenched in their ways to ever change. The next few weeks were a blur. Cassie threw herself into her new role, meeting with officers, reviewing policies, and setting the tone for what she hoped would be a department-wide shift. The first few days were tense. Some officers were cooperative, even supportive, while others made their displeasure known. Cassie's approach was direct. No tolerance for bias, no tolerance for discrimination, and absolutely no tolerance for officers who thought they were above the law. One afternoon, Cassie found herself at the scene of a traffic stop gone wrong. A young man, whose car had been pulled over for a routine violation, was now standing on the sidewalk, handcuffed and visibly upset. She immediately recognized the situation. It wasn't the first time she had seen an officer escalate a situation unnecessarily. As she approached, the officer who had made the stop, Officer Tom Brinks, was speaking to the young man in a condescending tone. "Come on, man. You know the drill. Quit making a scene," Officer Brinks said, his voice loud and dismissive. Cassie's instincts kicked in. She walked up to the officer, her expression calm but firm. "What's going on here, officer?" Brinks turned to her, a look of annoyance flashing across his face. "Chief Owens, everything's fine here. Just dealing with a situation." Cassie didn't miss the disdain in his voice. She'd heard it before, the subtle resistance to her authority. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. "The young man is handcuffed for a routine traffic stop. That's not fine. You need to explain why you've escalated this situation, and you need to remove those cuffs immediately."
Cassie turned to the young man. "I apologize for the way you were treated," she said, her tone sincere. "You have every right to file a complaint if you feel it's necessary." The young man looked at her, surprise and gratitude flashing across his face. "Thank you, Chief," he said quietly before walking away. Cassie watched him leave, then turned back to Brinks, who was now standing with his arms crossed, visibly irritated. "I don't want to hear that this is how things have always been done," Cassie said, her voice hard. "That's the problem. If we're going to fix this department, every officer needs to change their mindset. This isn't about being tough on crime, it's about being fair and just. If you can't get on board with that, then you'll find yourself on a very different path." Brinks didn't speak, but the look in his eyes told Cassie all she needed to know. He wasn't ready for change. Not yet. Later that evening, Cassie sat in her office reviewing the incident report from the traffic stop. The young man had filed a complaint, which was exactly what Cassie had hoped for. She needed to create a culture where the community felt empowered to speak up, where they knew their voices would be heard and respected. She was in the middle of making notes when her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Officer Rachel Moore, one of the newer recruits who had shown promise during her training. "Chief, just wanted to say thank you for having our backs today. It's refreshing to see someone who's willing to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. I'm with you." Cassie typed back quickly. "Thank you, Rachel. It means a lot to have you on my team. We're going to make a real difference here. Together." As she set the phone down, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to reflect. The journey ahead was going to be difficult. There would be resistance, setbacks, and days when she felt like giving up. But Cassie knew one thing for sure. She couldn't and wouldn't back down. The battle for justice was far from over, and she was exactly where she needed to be. Weeks passed, and the pressure of leading a department as fractured as Silverbrook's continued to mount. Cassie had started to see signs of progress. A few of the officers had begun to embrace the changes she was pushing for, understanding that the department's future depended on breaking free from the outdated mindset that had plagued it for years. But even with the small victories, there were still a lot of obstacles to overcome. Cassie had taken a hands-on approach, meeting with the community leaders and organizing town halls to foster a stronger relationship between the police and the people they served. She knew that without community trust, her efforts would be in vain. Silverbrook was a city of diverse backgrounds, and she was determined to make sure the department reflected that diversity. One afternoon, Cassie sat in a conference room with a group of community leaders. They were discussing how to improve communication and transparency between the department and the public. The room was filled with passionate individuals, some who had been fighting for police reform for years, and others who were just beginning to realize how much work needed to be done. But one thing was clear: they all wanted change. Cassie listened intently as a local activist, Maria Gutierrez, spoke about the frustrations many in the community had with law enforcement. "People feel like the department doesn't care about them," Maria said, her voice firm but not hostile. "We need to see that officers are invested in the community, not just here to hand out tickets or make arrests." Cassie nodded thoughtfully. "I understand, Maria. That's exactly why I'm here. The relationship between the police and the community needs to be built on trust and mutual respect, and that's something we can only achieve through consistent effort and accountability." Maria looked at Cassie, her expression skeptical. "And how do you plan to make that happen? You're the chief, but you can't change everything overnight. How can we be sure you're not just another officer in a uniform promising things that won't come true?" Cassie met her gaze steadily. "I won't pretend that change will come easily or quickly, but I'm committed to this. I'm committed to making Silverbrook a place where everyone feels safe, where they feel heard. The first step is getting the officers in my department to understand that their job isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about serving the people, respecting them, and protecting their rights." There was a brief silence in the room as the community leaders absorbed Cassie's words. Then, to Cassie's surprise, Maria nodded. "I can get behind that," Maria said, "but I'll be watching, and so will everyone else." Cassie smiled, a sense of determination settling over her. "That's exactly what I want. I want the community to hold me and my department accountable. We need that. It's the only way we'll build a real, lasting change." The meeting ended on a positive note, with both sides agreeing to work together. But Cassie knew that action spoke louder than words. Her department needed to show the community that they were serious about reform. She'd already made strides with a few officers, but it was the larger group that would prove more challenging. As she returned to her office, Cassie reflected on the day's events. The community's skepticism was understandable, but it also served as a reminder that she had to keep pushing forward. She couldn't afford to get complacent, no matter how much progress she made. The work wasn't done until everyone in Silverbrook felt that the police department truly represented. The following week, Cassie decided to visit one of the precincts outside of the main city. It was a smaller office, tucked away in a quieter part of town, but it was no less important. She needed to make sure that the officers in every precinct felt the weight of her leadership and the expectation of change. As she walked through the precinct, she was greeted by a few of the officers with wary smiles. It was clear that some were still hesitant about her presence. But Cassie had come prepared. She had scheduled a meeting with the officers to address their concerns and discuss the new policies she was implementing. She had already received complaints from some of the senior officers, particularly those who had been in the department for decades. They were resistant to the idea of changing the way they operated, and some were vocal about their disdain for Cassie's approach. She entered the briefing room, where a handful of officers sat waiting for her. As soon as she entered, the room fell silent. The tension was palpable, but Cassie remained calm, standing tall at the front of the room. "I know some of you have concerns about the direction I'm taking this department," she began, her voice steady, "and I want to hear those concerns. But I also want to make it clear that this isn't up for debate. We are moving forward with changes. These changes aren't about punishing anyone, they're about creating a department that serves all of Silverbrook." A senior officer, Lieutenant Frank Myers, who had been with the department for over 20 years, stood up. "With all due respect, Chief, we've been doing things a certain way for a long time. Now you want to change it all overnight? This isn't going to work. You can't just throw away decades of tradition." Cassie's eyes met his, unwavering. "I'm not throwing away tradition. What I'm doing is making sure our traditions reflect the values that this city deserves.
We're here to protect and serve, not to intimidate or make assumptions based on someone's race, gender, or background. And I won't allow this department to operate under the assumption that some people are less deserving of respect than others." Lieutenant Myers looked taken aback. He opened his mouth to respond, but Cassie raised her hand, signaling him to stop. "This is non-negotiable. If you can't work with me on this, then I'll find officers who can. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make Silverbrook better. And if that means I have to make tough decisions along the way, so be it." There was a long pause, and Cassie could see the officers exchanging glances. Finally, Lieutenant Myers spoke, his tone less combative. "Understood, Chief. I'm just, not sure how all this is going to play out." "I understand," Cassie replied, "but the truth is, none of us are sure. What I do know is that we're not going to make progress if we don't start somewhere. And this is where we start." The room was quiet for a moment longer, but Cassie could sense the shift. The officers were still uncertain, but they were listening. For the first time, Cassie felt a sense of hope that she was on the right path. They would come around, even if it took time. As she left the precinct later that afternoon, Cassie allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had faced resistance, but she had held her ground. This wasn't about making people like her. It was about creating a culture that valued justice, fairness, and accountability. And as she drove back to headquarters, Cassie felt the weight of her responsibility settle deeper within her. There was so much more to do, but she was ready. She had fought for this position. She had fought for change. And now she was going to see it through. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible. And Cassie Owens was determined to make sure that Silverbrook would be a city where justice and fairness weren't just ideals, they were a way of life. Lessons learned. The story of Cassie Owens' first day as Chief of Police in Silverbrook highlights several powerful life lessons. First, it teaches the importance of standing up for what is right, even when faced with resistance. Cassie's courage to confront officers who displayed bias and disrespect demonstrates that true leadership is not about gaining popularity, but about making tough decisions for the greater good. It also emphasizes the need for accountability, both personally and within institutions. Cassie doesn't just challenge her officers to change, she holds herself accountable as well, constantly striving for transparency and integrity. The story also underscores the power of persistence in the face of adversity. Cassie's journey to becoming chief was filled with barriers, yet she persevered because she understood that meaningful change takes time and effort. Finally, it's a reminder that change starts with individuals, but collective progress requires collaboration and dialogue. Cassie's approach to building bridges with the community and fostering open conversations in the department shows that creating a better future requires both leadership and the willingness to listen and learn. Ultimately, Cassie's story encourages us to be brave, accountable, and committed to creating positive change no matter how difficult the journey. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover our content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates from our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next videos.